we're going to pick back up and start talking about those issues of time, talent, and treasure, and how can we implement some of those principles into the functional areas of our church so that we see those lived out in the life of the church. And so this is really coming back to that issue of combining our faith and our practice. And, Joe shared a little bit about in the book of Acts how when the early church started, it started in revival, of course. Peter gets up that one day, opens his mouth, 3,000 people are added to the church. And within just a short period of time, now all of a sudden, we're having church. We know we're having church because we're having arguments and logistical problems. People are selling their stuff, bringing it to the church. What do we do with that, right? And so all this stuff, starts to ensue. And of course, one of the solutions to that was, okay, we need to start finding some people to handle the business, right? Let us choose from among ourselves 7 men full of the wisdom of the Holy Spirit, men of good reputation, right? Interesting that they didn't say people who have degrees in breadline distribution, 7 years experience, whatever it was. They said the qualifications were spiritual qualifications. We need people of good reputation, full of wisdom, full of the Holy Spirit to handle the business so that we can focus on the Word. And of course, Joe talked about the ministry that happened from that. But I always think that's very important that we recognize that God has given us in the church exactly what we need to do the business and to do it well. And so that's where now walking this out as they did, we're learning to how do we marry the principles, the things that we hear from God, the fact that we have the Holy Spirit resident with us to guide us and show us how to do things. How do we marry that with the actual practical steps that we take to see that happen? One of my favorite examples of it done in the Word is the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And I like specifically the Luke account of it where it says that when he's telling them, give them something to eat, and they said, well, how could we feed all these people? And he says, what do you have? Go and see. I call that taking inventory. That's actually a business practice. But he's doing it in faith, right? So they come back, of course, you know the story. We have 5 loaves and 2 fish from this little lad over here. And so then Jesus says, make the people sit down in groups of 50. Well, what is he doing? He's starting to take logistical, practical measures to prepare for a miracle. We would call that budgeting, right? I'm starting to set things up and take what I have so that I can begin to disperse it and figure out how I'm gonna parse it out. Well, that's exactly what we do in church. We hear a word from God saying, this is what I want you to do. I want you to feed your community, spiritually or whatever, maybe even physically. I want you to do this thing. And we, the disciples come back sometimes and say, Lord, how are we going to do that? We don't have enough, right? All we have is 5 loaves and 2 fish, or whatever that represents in our church. And yet what happens sometimes for us is that rather than doing what Jesus did and saying, okay, well, let's begin to prepare as though what we have is going to meet the need, we say, well, we need to stop and wait for the resources to come, right? And so these are the juncture points where we're trying to learn how do we take the steps and begin to make the preparations, make the people sit in groups of 50 or whatever that looks like in our church, the practical things, so that the power of God can flow to that. And so that's kind of where we want to pick up today. And here's something I wanted to share with you. I think you'll appreciate this out of John chapter 21, verse 6. As it pertains to that discipline to do only what the Lord commands, and to know that when we do that, the resources are going to be there. And it's the story of the second time the disciples are out fishing and they meet Jesus. Remember the first time, he says, launch out into the deep, let your nets for the catch. Lord, we fished all night, we caught nothing. Remember that story? Well, this is the second time now. Jesus has died, been resurrected. They don't know it's him yet. He's on the shore. And he calls out to them in verse 6 and he says, children, do you have any food? And they answered him, said, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. And you know the story, so they cast, and now they were not able to draw it because of the multitude of fish. And he goes on to say the net wasn't breaking this time, unlike the previous time. I think the significant thing is that these guys, of course, are fishermen. They know how to fish. They know what they're doing. And Jesus gives them a very strange instruction. Put the net on the right side of the boat. And this is a hypothetical question. Of course, we're not going to base any doctrine on this, but I ask this often. What do you think would have happened if they would have thrown the net on the left side of the boat? Anybody think they would have caught anything? No. Why? Because we all understand God commanded the fish to be on the right side of the boat, right? So the key is getting ourselves to a place and disciplining ourselves to fish where the Lord tells us to fish. Because we know If we don't do that, we're fishing in the wrong spot, and the resources are where God commanded them to be, right? How Psalm 133 talks about the anointing and the blessing commanded to be where the anointing flows, and of course, anointing flows in an atmosphere of unity. So when we're in unity with the Lord and we humble ourselves to do what He's saying, then there's going to be blessing there. And so the question that I want to address with some of these practical things is, how do we keep the church's resources from getting siphoned off towards the things that God didn't say to do? And how do we keep ourselves focused on fishing and doing the things that God did say to do, so that we can make sure that we're operating in the place where He's commanded the blessings and the resources to be? So coming back to that concept of time, talent, and treasure, I'm going to talk about time first. And when I talk about time, I'm going to think about time and space as it pertains to church ministry. Okay, so when we talk about time, we're talking about really the time. We have 7 days a week in our ministries to offer ministry activities and to, leverage and focus our teams towards doing things. Okay, and of course, in that time frame, we have space. When we're talking about our church facilities specifically, to offer with that as well. And so one of the things that happens with time, just like what happens with money, is that time can get sucked up by all of the little things that interfere with what we're supposed to be doing. I read this book called Killing Cockroaches, and it was written by a pastor out in Florida named Tony Morgan, and he's also like a marketing guy. He owns some kind of marketing company. But he was telling the story, the premise of his book, about when he used to be a city manager. And I don't know if you know much about city operations, but the city manager is actually the person that runs the city, not the mayor. City manager is the big wheel. The mayor is an elected official that is, the politician, but the city manager is kind of like the guts behind the operation. And so the city manager is a big, big responsibility. So this guy's a city manager. I don't remember what city it was, but he was telling the story about how he was doing all these things, responsible for so many things, really in a stressed out situation on a particular day. And he's in his office working, and all of a sudden, outside of his office door, he hears screaming. And he runs out, and what's going on? And one of his assistants out there was screaming because there were cockroaches in the office. And so, and he has a lot of ladies that were working with him and stuff, and they were all freaked out by him. So he's sitting there trying to chase these cockroaches around, killing them and everything. And he lost, a good portion of his time during that day, and he gets back into his office and thinking, man, I don't have time to deal with this. And he realizes, here, I'm the city manager, and yet I'm spending my time killing cockroaches, And he realized that's exactly what happens to us in our spiritual lives and in our ministry lives. He later on became a pastor and, applied this to his work in ministry and said, this is exactly what happens, is that we find ourselves chasing after distractions and situations instead of, focusing on what the Lord has called us to do. So what are some things we can do to help prevent that? So this is what I came up with. A couple of key tools and tips on how to stop the church's time from being stolen away into things that are less important. Actually, if you can back up one, Edna. The other way. Other way. It's going backwards, or going forward instead of backward. So I'm going to talk about a couple things. This is going to be you may have to go into, hit escape and then go backward. There you go. I'm going to talk about church calendar. Now, if we're getting practical, one of the things that happens in ministry is that we've got all kinds of different ministry teams that are all, working at the same time, and everybody is wanting to use the same space, right, and the same resources. Everybody wants time, to get their announcement in either the bulletin or, more importantly, where does everyone like to have their announcement? From the platform, right? And of course, we can only announce so many things from the platform, because if we announced everything, we wouldn't even have time for service, right? And so there's lots of those issues that we deal with on a regular basis. So how do we get ourselves to a place where we have all these different people? Of course, we want lots of people involved in the ministry. We need lots of people involved in the ministry if we're going to do all the things that God has called us to do. How do we create a system that allows all of these different people to work together in a way where there's not constantly clashes and conflicts? Have you ever had things where you double booked something on the church calendar, and now you've got two competing events that, because of the competition, now they both don't go well? because we've split the attention of the congregation. Or you've had the situation where, we've got a certain number of chairs to work with, and we have 2 different events, and maybe they're in 2 different sides of the church building, but they're using the same chairs, right? And so now what do? Everyone's experienced this at some point or another. We've experienced this, probably anyone who's married has had this experience with money, but you're spending money out of this same checking account, right? And I'm spending money that I thought we had for this, and you're spending money we thought we had for that, and we realized we spent the same money on on 2 different things, right? So this happens in lots of different ways. And so there are systems now that have been developed that are very practical to help churches to manage those resources and to help avoid and actually identify in advance the conflicts. So online master calendars where you can actually record rooms in the calendar and be able to book the rooms. Not only can you book the rooms, but you can also record how many resources you have. So you can record the number of chairs that you own, the number of tables that you own, the number of coffee pots or linens or whatever it is that you want to include and allow people to request. You can schedule services that are associated with the use of the church campus, like the sound booth. Sometimes you have an event that requires someone to run sound for you. Well, how many of you know you don't want anybody just running sound, right? That can get messed up real quick if you got someone who comes and they change all of your settings and you come in for service and nobody can figure out, why the soundboard's all messed up, right? So we want to be able to kind of control those things. So these products, these online services, give you the ability to schedule a sound and actually request an approval from somebody that may be responsible for that particular area of ministry, so that they can say, yes, I'll be there, or yes, I'll have somebody there, or no, nobody's available, we got to figure something else out, and give you the chance to figure that out before the day of. And then, of course, protect the resources so that things don't disappear. We know who scheduled them, who used them, where they went. How many of you had that experience? Hey, we had an event. What happened to the podium? What happened to the flip chart? Well, it's in somebody's car somewhere, right? And so trying to track that down is difficult. So here's one such program that I wanted to suggest to you as what I would consider to be the premier one. It's one that we use here. It's called Ministry Space, E with the letter E. And the way it works, it's a website, it's an online service. There is a monthly fee associated with it. The fee is based on how many people are using it and how many resources you are managing. So the more rooms that you're trying to manage, there's an incremental increase in the fee. The more, and it comes with a base amount, I don't remember what it is. The number of additional resources, chairs, tables, whatever it is that you're wanting to manage as part of this system are also calculated into the fee. And so on the previous screen, that was a screen where you could actually set up an event. So you can actually train your volunteers or have someone train them to create an event for the church, and it puts a request that can go to somebody in the church. Maybe you have an administrator or somebody that kind of manages the calendar, so they would be able to see the requests that come in, the time, the date, when it falls on the calendar. And along with that, you can actually, if you go on to the next one, Edna, you can actually then schedule all of the different rooms and resources. So the items in the orange are rooms. The items in blue are equipment or furnishings that you would want to utilize. And then the items in purple would be services. So, for example, you may be doing a Christmas concert and you're wanting to use the atrium. You're wanting to schedule childcare and a lighting technician and, I forget, what does that one say? Sound. Oh, sound technician, okay. So for this particular event, these are the things that we're requesting. And now all the people in the church that are involved in making that happen can be notified via email. They can also have logins if you've set them up to be able to kind of approve these kinds of things. Once they get notified, they follow the link. It takes them there. Someone's wanting to use the soundboard for a Christmas concert. Well, if this is an all-church event, they probably already know about it. So, yep, we're all set for that. All they hit is approve. And then when you go into the next screen, they've approved those things. They just click on their part. And then if you go on to the next screen, now you can actually print out a summary of your event, and it'll tell you for this particular event, these are the different rooms that we'll be using. These are the different resources that will be tied up during that time, and these are the different services that are going to be needed from different areas of the church. And you can actually get an overview of the event, or you can actually do this by room, so you can print out a schedule for the room and everything that's going to be happening in there. So can you see the value of this and helping to kind of identify those resource conflicts? And it's the real benefit of it comes in where, there's oftentimes lots of different requests to use things, but of course not everything that happens in church are things that necessarily come back to the key things that the Lord said, this is what I want you to do. This is a key part of the ministry. So what this allows us to do is, as the requests are being made, in advance, we have an opportunity to filter through all the different requests for resource and make sure, from a pastoral perspective, we're making sure that the facility is being prioritized to do the things that God really told us to do. And, of course, if there's leftover time and space and it's no big deal, then, yeah, we can accommodate other things that may not be part of the main things that the Lord told us, but they don't cause any problem. But the great thing is, if they do cause a problem, we can figure that in advance rather than on the day of, right? And now all of a sudden we've got people in the church that are getting their feelings hurt and so on and so forth. So is that a benefit to you, to see a practical tool like that? Here's a couple of other, that's an example of a calendar, so you can print out a calendar for the room. This is really nice when you have different rooms that are used throughout the week, and you can actually post a calendar outside the door. So people can come and say, can look and say, hey, is this room going to be available? And there's the calendar for what's scheduled for that week. Especially as the church gets bigger and you start having a facilities team that helps to run things, this is something that is really a helpful tool for them to manage, the setup and all that of the room. So here's a couple of different options for this kind of resource. The first I already told you about, Ministry Space, and there is the website. This presentation, by the way, will be online in Moodle, so you'd be able to access this. Another one that's very good is called My Service U. It's a web program that's used by a lot of different industries, but they do a lot of work with ministry. I used it for years here, and it works very much the same way. And then there's another one called Event Management Systems. The My Service U resource, I don't think is quite as robust and user-friendly as the Ministry Space, but the good thing about it is it also offers event services. Like if you wanted to do a concert or something like that, you can actually do ticketing through My Service U, and they also do offer online giving features, so you can do online donations and online payment and those kinds of things. So the great thing about these types of services is that regardless of where you are as a church, you may not have the wherewithal at this moment to develop all of these systems. These are kind of like systems in a box. All you have to do is subscribe, and it just walks you through everything you need to know. There's online tutorials that you really don't need any training. You can find somebody in your church that says, would you learn this system? They can get trained, they can become the expert and train other people, and it's just a very quick way of taking your church from, maybe basic systems into very advanced systems using just an online program. So that was my recommendation regarding time. Now let's talk about talent, and I'm gonna focus a little bit on communication. How do we engage the congregation with the most important things so that we're leveraging their focus and attention on things that God is speaking to our church and the things that are coming up? Again, getting through the information saturation in our world is very, very difficult, is it not? And as we talked about yesterday, even depending on the generation that you're talking to, you may have to use different means of communication because not everybody uses the same. And so let's talk about a couple of the different options. The first is what typically is now referred to as old school communication, which would be snail mail, right? I read a statistic not long ago that said that roughly 2% of mail communication, whether it's letters or informational pieces, roughly 2% receives responses or actually gets read. And that was based on, I don't know if it was part of the census or what, but it was a big survey that had been done regarding the effectiveness of marketing. And one of the reasons why a lot of the businesses are now looking to electronic means because it's got a slightly higher percentage rate, but the cost-benefit difference is humongous. The cost of printing things and sending them out when only roughly 2% of people read them is difficult. Have you ever been out in a parking lot somewhere and had someone stuff something into your windshield wiper? And oftentimes the thing that they're putting in there is a fairly expensive piece, full color process, glossy, black and white. How often do you read that? Percentage of the time, maybe? Never? Yeah, take it out and throw it in the trash or whatever, right? It's almost irritation. So and obviously probably not the most effective delivery system for that, probably be a little bit better in the mail, but how many things do we get in the mail that we thumb through and having to weed through all that trash? And so that has created a culture because of the saturation that people don't read it anymore. So, but it is effective for a portion of the population. So sometimes if you're knowing who you're targeting, that can be helpful. Okay, now, next level would be something that's not as hip as it used to be, email, right? Again, still relevant to a good section of our population, primarily what a lot would call the older generation. I would be included in that, right? Email was new when I was young, so I still remember when that was like the cutting edge thing. So email, definitely a higher level of effectiveness than snail mail, but increasingly less effective. Is that true? Because all of us who have email accounts know how our email boxes are starting to feel a lot like our mailboxes, right? It's just saturated with spam and all kinds of things that we don't have time to read. But here are a few tools in church that are more common tools to help manage email communication. These are, again, online services that you can use. You can actually build databases of email addresses that are for your church, and you also can segregate different distribution lists. So you can have a database for our elders, or a database for our youth, or whatever it is that you want to have. And you can actually send them targeted emails. And so these services like Constant Contact, one of the more popular ones now is called MailChimp, SendBlaster, Helio Media. There's also one called BombBomb, and BombBomb is actually for embedded video. So instead of emailing text, you can put text on it, but you're primarily emailing video clips. And so that's proven to have a little bit more effectiveness for a lot of people who would rather watch something than read something. And so different tools that you can use to manage ongoing communication. This is what's coming up this week in service, and so on and so forth. Some of the great things about these services are when email addresses are no longer good, either someone canceled it or whatever, or if you're blocked or something like that, the service will actually pick up on that and let you know this email address is no longer good. It'll allow you to measure your effectiveness. So it measures how many people opened your email, how many people read your email, how many people clicked on a link that was on your email and followed it to see, if you're sending information about an event that you want to invite people to register for, you can get a percentage of how many people actually clicked that link and went to the registration page and so forth. So that's helpful information, isn't it? Something you can't do with snail mail, right? So it is another level of resource to help us engage and help us to know how good of a job are we doing at reaching and getting this important information to our people. Okay, but not as hip as it used to be. Okay, the next group or next level is getting more modern. We talked about this yesterday. Now we're getting into social media, and you saw the video last night about the advent of social media and how much more connected people are through social media nowadays than really any other channel of communication, particularly the younger generation. With social media, now there are all kinds of different tools that are available to help you, again, assess how engaged are people. So, for example, in Facebook, at my church, we do a lot of our communication through Facebook, and Facebook gives you real-time information of how many people are looking at your posts, how many people are responding to your posts, how many people are talking to other people about what you posted. This is helpful information because, again, it helps you to be able to gauge, is the information that we're posting something that not only is reaching people and getting in front of them, but is it something that's causing them to talk? Not only that, but there are features now integrated into these social media sites that allow you, if you want to pay a fee, you can actually boost your posts to where it'll actually take whatever you posted and feed it through the people that are looking at your site and have friended your site. It'll post it on their site. So it's getting in front of their friends. And you also have the ability to manage the time of day. So, for some of these small fees, and when I'm talking about small fees, sometimes it's $5 or $10, it'll monitor the different people that you're connected to through social media and when they're on their site, and it'll figure out when's the best time to post your ad at that time. So you can understand why things like the Ford Explorer launch, which was only advertised through Facebook, got more views than the entire Super Bowl, right? Because the technology and the connectedness allows you to monitor and measure when is the best time to get this information in front of people. So that's why these things are taking off so huge, because the world around us is getting connected this way. And did I tell you yesterday about the young adults that I was trying to communicate with email? And like for weeks, oh my goodness, it blew my mind. For the longest time, I avoided Facebook like the plague. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I did not need one more thing to respond to, right? I got emails coming out my ears. I've got text messages coming at me. I got people leaving messages on my phone. I've got 2 or 3 phones, right? My cell phone, my work phone, my home phone. I got too many channels of communication coming at me. I don't need one more. Until one day, I watched a video similar to the one that I showed you, and I realized that if I'm going to be an influencer to the emerging generations, if I don't force myself out of my own comfort zone to be able to talk to them in the forums that they talk, I'm not going to be able to talk to them. And so that was the thing for me that pushed me over the edge and said, all right, I need to take the time and discipline myself to engage in this and learn, how to use this, for effectiveness and fruitfulness in ministry. So that I would encourage you and challenge you to consider that as well. And I understand the reasons not to get involved, but again, the more our world moves towards this as a primary mode of communication, the more that we will miss out on opportunities to utilize it. So there are some great different tools. There's one tool that I'll mention called Sprout Social. It's an online website, and Sprout Social is a site that would actually allow you to manage multiple different types of social media, like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, all these different ones that are used out there, from one place. And what you can do is you can actually schedule communication for your church, like, for example, if you want to make a big announcement about an upcoming service or series or event that you have, you can schedule, you write it all up, schedule when you want it to post, where you want it to post, and you can schedule it to post multiple times, all from one place. So you can actually do it all in one sitting and schedule it out for the week. So you can, do an initial announcement, a reminder, maybe a link when maybe you don't have registration open until a certain day. You can schedule a link for later. And so that's, sometimes you wonder, how do people manage all this? Well, there are tools now that allow you to manage it a little bit more simply. Okay, and then now getting very modern or cutting edge, a lot of the very modern technology ministries are actually developing their own apps for phones. It was recently reported that most of web traffic now is accessed through mobile devices, no longer through computers. So more people access the internet through their phones and through their iPads and so forth than they do through computers. That's a recent change. And it's believed by many of the tech companies that trend is going to continue. So that's why some people thought the iPad was going to be a fad. Well, not only is it not a fad, but now all the other Samsung and Windows and all these different organizations are coming up with all kinds of different variations and sizes of that very thing, because they're realizing, no, this is actually the way things are moving. So a lot of the ministries out there that are doing this effectively have developed their own apps that allow you to kind of weed through the other noise and allow you to leverage all of the communication around the things that you're doing. So one big ministry, Hillsongs, you'd be familiar with, out of Australia, they of course have campuses all over the world now. And their app is, I think, a perfect example of how you can use the power of something like this for ministry. If you have a chance to look at it, it's really, really powerful, because they have their different pastors from their campuses around the world that will post devotionals. They'll post things that are happening, testimonies, pictures of people being ministered to. And in using this technology, they have really created a community where they truly feel like one church, even though they're in all these different countries, different time zones. You go on their site and you can see how they interact with each other, and the worship leaders post songs that were just published and different things, testimonies from people that went out on a missions endeavor and saw people get transformed, and they've really figured out how to leverage these stories to give us a sense of, hey, together we're doing something powerful for the kingdom of God. So I really encourage you to look at something like that. And these are actually fairly inexpensive to have designed. To get this complex would be expensive, but there are sites out there now that, or not sites, but companies that will actually develop a app for your church based on existing templates. And so an app for your church would include something like your church calendar, so people who go to your church could just look up what's coming up. Maybe things that are posted from your website that would feed in. If you wanted to do a blog for devotions or anything like that, they could build that in. And so you've seen something like that if you were at Foursquare Convention and saw the app that was used during the convention. Just information, news, facility maps, those kinds of things, easy to integrate into a phone app that's specific for your ministry. Okay, and then the last thing that I would say is helpful before I talk about church management systems is you have to use this sparingly, but also text message blasting. And so nowadays, getting through the noise, as difficult as it is, even Facebook, even email, even if you use all of those things, there's still a cross-section of people that they're so busy and so inundated with stuff that if you have something really important to get to them, you're not going to get it to them unless you do that push communication directly to the phone. And of course, you can irritate people with this as well, so you want to use it very sparingly. But to use a text messaging service, there are things that for very, very important information, you can actually, if you gather people's phone numbers, you can actually send a text message blast with a piece of information. So the way we use this in the Southwest District is we've integrated this for a very important announcement, like somebody passed away. Like I don't think we did it for Jerry Cook when he passed away, but something like that we might text out to our Foursquare or our district family and say, hey, by the way, Pastor Jerry Cook, went to be with the Lord. But another thing that we use it for is for like the day of our fall conference. Oftentimes, even though we post all the information, we send it all out in the paperwork, people invariably call. We get inundated with calls on the day of the conference saying, "Where do I go again? Where's the conference, or what? Where do I park, or whatever it is." So usually on the day of now, we send a text blast to everybody saying, "Don't forget, conference starts at this time. This is the address. Here's the link to the website. All the information's there." So just as a way of making sure that we're getting to everyone, putting it right there on their phone, the information that we know that they're going to need, or at least a lot of people are going to be looking for on that particular day. So we wouldn't do that every day, but on a special day, we'd do something like that. Does that make sense? So it's something you have to use very sparingly, but it's very effective if you use it sparingly. Okay, let's talk about church management systems. By the way, let me take a quick stop and ask, does anyone have any questions about any of this stuff I've talked about so far? I know I'm kind of running through lots of things really quickly because I got a lot of stuff to cover, but I'm really just trying to give you some of these practical tools to help align the church towards the vision. And these are all different tools that are we get asked about a lot. Yeah?
Do you have any idea about what would be the least expensive, good option for a church app builder or host? Yeah, I find that thing is pretty prohibitive sometimes.
Yeah. I don't know all of them that are out there. I know that there is one gentleman who's been coming to the Foursquare conventions, and they did the app for convention. It's called Oodles. I think, Oodles. I played golf with him. He's a Foursquare minister, actually, that that runs the company. But I know theirs is fairly expensive, and they do a discount for Foursquare churches. So Oodles app. But there are others, too. I don't know all of them out there. So, Pastor Mike.
I think it's him, at the convention, he said that app is, depending on your size, is between $2,000 and $4,000.
2,000 and 4,000? I talked to him about it, and I didn't remember it being that much. But yeah, that seems like a lot of money to me for an app. I know that there are cheaper ways to get them out there because a lot of them are just already built templates, so you actually just are feeding information in. So I'm going to give you something else about an app that would actually maybe help you additionally, and that's has to do with church management systems. Church management systems are a fancy way of saying church database. But these church databases nowadays are becoming much more robust and comprehensive and accommodate a wide variety of different features that the old church management systems or the traditional ones didn't accommodate. Typically, a church management system would keep track of things like member information, so it's sort of your online Rolodex, right? It's where you keep your address information and your contact information. They also now all include communication tools, so you can use that information to either send out emails in mass or do something called a mail merge, which is where you can actually use the data right out of the database to integrate into a document and actually print out form letters that are pre-addressed for everybody. To do pastoral care and follow-up, so as you pull up an individual's record, you can actually use the database to keep notes that are secured for pastoral visitation, counseling, anything you may have talked to the person about that you want to keep on record. You can have that's password protected. Nowadays, a lot of them also include features or modules for kids check-in. So when you check into kids' church in the nursery, these systems will actually allow you to check in the kids and print out a tag for the parents so that they can actually claim the parents when they come to pick them up. And of course, they give you a code that you can also use on your screens during service to call the parent if something's happening with the child. So those are now, most of them, built in. Some of the newest ones also integrate a module to do background checks for your workers as part of the database. So electronically. So you can actually pull up the record, order a background check right there online. It connects to the service. It does the background check. It secures the background check in a protected PDF file that's not accessible to anyone other than those who have been given access. And it actually keeps that on file in your database. So that's actually a pretty powerful tool. Some of them offer ministry involvement and scheduling. And so if you want to build teams and rosters of who's on a particular ministry, so you may have a team that helps with the food pantry, you can actually, in the database, label these are all of our people that are part of our food pantry team and create a list so that you can communicate to them, so that you can have a roster. You can even build a schedule of when they're serving and so forth. Contribution tracking is probably one of the most important features because that's a legal requirement that we have as a church. We're supposed to document our donors' giving and provide substantiation to them of their giving. And so these systems actually build it in to where you can actually record in the system, and most of you use this, who's giving and the record of their giving, and you even make distinctions between items that are tax deductible and those that might not be. So for example, if they're buying something or they're paying for camp or something like that, they may do it all in one check, with their tithe and offering. So this allows you to split it, say this part of it's not tax deductible, this part of it is, and it allows you to generate that form letter at the end of the year that gives all the information that they need with the disclaimer that they need about this is, not an exchange for goods and services, and you can just send it out right out of the database. And nowadays you can even email it right out of the database, so it saves a lot of money in postage. So very helpful. And then many of these also have their own apps that go for the phone. So you don't have to pay for it. It comes with the system. And so that's very helpful to a pastor or a ministry leader when you have your whole church database, and on your phone, you can, through the app, access that database, pull up somebody's phone number, address, if you need to go visit or something like that. You can actually look, at any history that you have access to. That's right at your fingertips. You have access to your entire, profile of all of your church members. And of course, the bigger your church gets, the more helpful that becomes. So strongly recommend a church management system of some kind. So let me give you a couple of examples here. We move on to the next. So people always call our office and say, so which ones are the best? Which is the one that we should get? And of course, the answer is always the same. It depends, right? It depends, because there is no one best one. There are a lot of good ones. And it really depends on your church's needs, your church's size, and your church's configuration. So I tried my best to give a couple of recommendations based on price and function, and also based on, do you need one that would be locally hosted? In other words, this is something that you would keep the data in your church office, or is this something that you would access through the web? And many of them can do both, especially the bigger, more expensive ones. But the reason I think those are important is because depending on the kind of church that you have, the kind of operation that you're running, for many, the difference between web-hosted and locally hosted is a big difference. If you're a new church, you don't have a church office, you're a pastor that works from Starbucks or whatever, the web ones have lots of benefits that allow you to get other people involved, other people to help you, allows you to work from wherever you are. You don't need church computers for them to work on. There's a lot of benefits to that. However, when you get into a larger church, there's a lot of benefits to not having it on the web. For example, at a church this size, having a web-based system that's not hosted from your own server is very problematic. One is because they tend to be slower. If you have multiple different people accessing the data, there's all kinds of problems with refresh rates and things like that. Things bog down and slow down. And so having something that you're hosting off your own server, you're not sharing the traffic with all the other churches that are using it, is a big, big deal. And so it really depends on a lot of things. But when it comes to price, if you're looking for something that's fairly low priced and a good web-based program, one that I would recommend is called Church Community Builder. It's got a lot of features, has everything that I mentioned on the other page. They offer fairly easy to use, and again, fairly low priced. For a locally hosted one, if you're going to actually just manage most of this out of 1 or 2 computers in a church office, another option would be something called ACS Technologies, Advanced Church Systems Technologies. That one is also a very, very good program for the price. And again, same kind of features available. If you're looking for the functionality between those two, I would recommend the Church Community Builder as having a few more of the features for the price. When it comes to the higher priced options, IMIS and Shelby Arena. IMIS is actually the software that the Foursquare Church is moving to replace Ezra. So I'm actually on the team that's working on the development team that's working on it. It's very, very powerful, very strong. It's going to be night and day difference from what we've had. There's even talk about the possibility, some of the things that we're doing for the denomination are going to provide features that for many churches, this will actually be what we use for much of our tracking, tracking our service attendance and those kinds of things. Depending on how things go, we're saying to the group that owns IMIS ASI, it would behoove you to develop a church module for churches to be able to buy that would partner with what we have in denominations. So that's kind of on them to see if they're going to do that, but we're trying to make that as easy as possible. So as a software, it's very, very robust, and it is web-based. And they do have the option of hosting it locally, but it's primarily web-based, so very good software. Another one that is probably the Cadillac is software called Arena, and it's actually managed and distributed by Shelby, who's been around forever. Many of you would have heard of Shelby Systems. Some of the power of Arena, it's a more expensive software, but extremely robust systems. It has all the different features, and it even has things like geographical interface. And what that means is you can actually pull up a map of your community or the state or whatever, and it'll actually plot the pins of where your households are. You can actually create circles or grab the pins and assign them to elders. It's got all kinds of features that are just amazing. It can be hosted locally. It can be web-based. It's got a very powerful app that comes with it. It has an unlimited number of classes and teams and things that you can track for your church. It kind of does everything. So very good program. So any questions about any of those? Some of the long-standing ones, Servant Keeper has been around for a long time. There's one called Accelerate that was created by Microsystem Design, good program. The only issue with some of those is that they were built on a very old platform, so as technology has changed, they've started to become kind of proprietary. Some of these other ones are a little bit newer in their design, and so they're keeping updated with the changing technology. All right, next slide. So another resource that I think is important for churches to know about is when it comes to managing our talents in terms of our team and answering the question, when it comes time to hire people, how do I know who to hire, how much are they supposed to be paid, and all that kind of stuff. So these are calls that we get at the district office all the time. Do you have any resource that explains, how much do worship leaders get paid? How much do kid pastors get paid? What's the normal ranges and so forth? And so there are a few tools that we like to tell people about. You can get information like what are the top paid positions and by gender and all that kind of stuff. It's still sad that we have a difference in those things, but there are statistics that show what those are. If you go to the next slide, these are two of the resources that we recommend. One is there's an annual church compensation handbook that's put out by Church Tax and Law Today. And in fact, that resource, Church Tax and Law Today, is a tremendous resource for your church on all kinds of issues concerning finances and legal issues. They produce monthly newsletters that you can subscribe to, and they just kind of give you the important updates of changes in the law and things that are going on. But they produce these resources like the handbook that actually measure compensation across the nation and then show it to you in different cross sections. So they'll say this is normal compensation in an urban area versus a rural area. This is the normal compensation based on church worship attendance. This is the normal compensation based on church income ranges, and all these different ways of looking at it. And then, of course, they give you aggregates as well. So it helps you to kind of look at things that would be apples to apples as for your church. And you can use the different charts to kind of help you zero in on, okay, so this would be a normal range, for pastors or ministry leaders in my church, based on others that are similar. Does that make sense? Another great resource is the Church Law Group. They're based out of Dallas. They also produce a compensation handbook. They're fairly, they offer a membership that's about $2,000 a year. It's pretty expensive, but the good thing about that membership is it comes with a few hours of prepaid legal advice and then a discounted rate if you ever needed, legal assistance. So typically those, something like that is not utilized unless you're at a church that's large enough to, warrant something like that. And if you have a school or something like that, you might need some additional help with something like that. But they produce all kinds of video updates and things like that. So I'd recommend you subscribe to their online newsletter, their email newsletter, where they will send out videos. They recently just sent out a video update about things you need to know about having a Super Bowl party in your church. Did you know that advertising a Super Bowl party in your church is actually considered a copyright infringement? You can be sued for that. And so just simple things like that, things you'd never think of. And they say you can't charge money for a Super Bowl party. Don't even call it a Super Bowl party. Call it a big game party, and different things like that. So very helpful information about some of the things that you don't want to trip over, and it's push communication. So they're sending it to you on a need-to-know basis as these things arise. And so these resources are great when it comes to getting answers to the questions, what is normal? What's the standard? What are the things that I need to know when I'm entering into this particular area of ministry business, payroll, or whatever it is? All right, let's go on to the next one. We're now in the treasure category. And charitable giving. This is another area where we get lots of calls from churches saying, all right, I need to know a little bit about online giving. And let me give you a couple of statistics about online giving, because a lot of ministry leaders are still kind of on the fence about whether that really makes sense. We have a good giving church. We've done the same process with the tithe and offering basket for years and years, and it makes sense for us. But I want to share with you some of the statistics about online giving. First, online giving has increased 13% from 2010 to 2011. So this is a slightly outdated statistic. I'm sure even more than that in the last year or two. 34.8% is the percentage of online giving coming from the final quarter of the year. So a lot of people giving online in the final quarter. Why would you think that would be? A lot of people who own businesses and things like that are doing a lot of their giving as they reconcile their business income at the end of the year, and they're trying to get it in before the year ends, right? So I would venture to say that a good portion of that percentage is coming right at the end of the year, right? As people are trying to get their final giving in for the tax year. 55% is the amount of total online giving raised by nonprofits generating less than $10 million in revenue each year. So 15.3 of that is percentage from nonprofits generating less than $1 million per year. So a fairly significant portion of revenue going to nonprofit organizations that are smaller come from online giving. 87% is the percentage of nonprofits that received an online donation over $1,000. And lastly, 100% is the figure for every nonprofit sector that has seen an experience in double-digit growth in online giving since 2009. I read a statistic a few years ago, and I couldn't find it when I went back to look for it, but it said that for a number of churches that had moved and transitioned to offering online giving, saw somewhere between a 20 and 25% increase in overall giving for the year. I'll tell you why I believe that is, particularly when you look at the younger generation, 30 and below. What you'll find is, most of them, if not all, do not carry checkbooks around with them anymore. So when it comes to, and many of them don't carry cash either, for the reasons that I talked about, debit card and all that kind of stuff. We're primarily an electronic generation. So when it comes time to, from the platform, talk about a particular ministry endeavor, missions or something like that, that is a spur of the moment, a lot of people who would normally give to those things on impulse are not in a position to where they can give right then and there. And as we know over the years, statistically, people that want to give towards something, but they don't have an opportunity to give right then and there when they feel the Lord speaking to them, when they leave, chances are that they're not going to give later on because, they get busy and they forget, and it's not convenient for them to do so. So one of the things that is a big contributor to the change in giving is that a lot of these young adults, the primary way that they transact business is from their phone. And so we found at our church, we only did this a few years ago, but we did find a marked increase in the giving when we offered a phone app for people to give through. Because even using credit card or debit card numbers or electronic checks, if they're having to write that information out on an envelope, a lot of people feel weird about that, right? Because of all the identity theft and all that stuff going on. So even that as an avenue doesn't feel safe. So unless you're providing a direct electronic transaction, a lot of people that's the only way they transact business now, they won't actually engage unless you have something to offer them. And so we noticed a marked increase in the giving. Not only that, but what really you noticed is a normalization of giving. Because for people that do give electronically, a lot of people now manage their finances either online through their online banking system or through some kind of software. Everything is done when they're sitting at their computer or either that or on their phone. So providing options for them to do recurring giving or programmed giving, where they're saying, send my check at this time or my electronic transaction at this time, is a big difference. Not only that, but electronic giving is actually much safer, because you're not actually transacting bills and things aren't going to get lost. And so we have exact records from the time it leaves the donor's, computer device to the time that it gets into the church's bank account. We have an audit trail all the way through. When people give into the offering plate, it is possible, although we hate to conceive of it, but it is possible that money gets taken out and nobody's the wiser, right? There's always that opportunity, whereas electronic giving, there is no opportunity for that. So these are pretty significant changes. So a lot of people ask, okay, so where did we start with this? Because it seems like kind of daunting to start utilizing these services, and there's so many to choose from. So here's one that I would recommend. It's called SecureGive, and it's been around for a while now. They handle a whole lot of churches, and the reason that I recommend them is because they offer multiple channels of electronic giving through one subscription. So when you subscribe with this service, included in the service is a transaction fee. Pretty much every online system that you use is going to have some kind of transaction fee associated with online giving. But included in the transaction fee, they provide a website option for you to either link something to your website, or you can actually donate through their website, and you can look up the church. You can allow for one-time gifts or recurring gifts. You can set up multiple funds. You can set up multiple campuses if you're a multi-site church. And they also offer kiosk giving. And they have different kiosk options of what you could buy. So a kiosk would be something that would be maybe in your foyer that people can go. They have options where you can swipe a card or just program the card in. They have options that range from using an iPad to using something that's a little bit more designated or designated to be a kiosk, designed to be a kiosk. And they also offer the iPhone app, which is also Google and Android as well. So for one subscription and the one transaction fee per gift, you get all of these different channels of how people can give to the church. The great thing about it is that they've also worked out the back end. See, I've worked with a couple of different online giving systems, and sometimes on the front, they're great. People can give, they can say what they're giving to. The problem is, when that money goes into your bank account, I need some kind of report that tells our team what was in that deposit, right? Who did that belong to, and what was it for? Because we have to log that in to our online system, or onto our church management system, rather. And so that can be the problem. So SecureGive's system is actually very good, where they do everything on batches, and you can easily print out a report for each batch that goes into your bank account, and that batch is segregated by donor and by fund and campus. So it's very simple to log that. And now some of the larger church management systems are working on integration to where you can actually pull the report. It'll go right into the contribution system, so you don't have to do any data entry, and then all you have to do is make corrections and verify and then say submit. And so it just saves all kinds of time. So can you see the value in this? So when I worked in public accounting in my early 20s, I told you that my firm, the firm that I worked for, was primarily working with agricultural clients. So they were mostly dairy farms, actually. And one of the things that I learned in working in the dairy industry is that there were some pretty significant technological changes that had taken place in the industry where cows, in the early days used to be milked by hand, right? And you had lots of workers and they'd come and do that. Well, then technology changed where they have these milking, systems now where you plug the pumps onto the udders and it does them. And they have different styles of barns that they milk the cows in. Well, the newest technology was a rotary system where they actually had a carousel and the cows would walk into the carousel and they'd plug them in and they'd rotate around and they'd just keep rotating cows on and off. So anyway, as the technology continued to change, there's all these new inventions and things. But there was a whole group of dairy farmers that they liked the old school milking by hand. And that was fine except for one thing. What was the problem? I can't be competitive anymore. I can't produce the amount of milk that way, even though we may have a good system, even though we may have low costs and we've got it perfectly designed. Because the competitors are moving down the road, I can't stay in business anymore because I can't produce the kind of milk, so the people that buy the milk don't want to do business with me anymore because I'm not producing the quantities that my competitors are. So there's a reality. It doesn't matter if your system works. As things change, as the world around us changes, sometimes we're forced to adopt these changes because if we don't, we become obsolete. We can't, stay in business anymore. And I really believe that that's one of the issues with the change of technology that we're experiencing right now. More and more and more, the world is going towards electronic financial transactions and away from checks and cash. And so if churches don't adopt some kind of system, a safe system, to begin to utilize this, what we're going to see is a continued drop-off in charitable giving, not because people are not wanting and willing to give, it's because we're not providing avenues for them to give in the way that they transact business. I went to the post office a few years ago to buy stamps for our contribution statements. And I brought a check made out, I called ahead, how much is it going to be, figured out the exact amount, had a check, came ready to drop off the check with the dual signatures, all according to our bylaws and everything like that. And when I got to the post desk, guess what I found out? The U.S. government doesn't accept checks. They only accept electronic transactions. And so that was a big eye-opener and a wake-up call even for us as a denomination, where we're starting to talk about this in the denominational circles. We have to change our policies and our bylaws to accommodate electronic systems because the vendors that we're transacting business with, even the government, is not accepting our method, our approved method of transacting business. And so that's why it was just shortly after that in a Foursquare convention, it was approved to do electronic checks, because that at least was one benefit. And so there's more changes like that coming, but that's just an example of the need for us to adapt to the emerging technologies and the changing in our in the world around us. So I think that's it for this first session, and we're going to go ahead and take a break unless you have any questions right now. And then when we come back, I'm actually going to spend a little time talking about payroll. And so I told you that that's the kind of the big issue for churches today, is understanding clergy taxation, payroll, and those things. So I'm going to spend a little time on that, and then we're going to have some time of interacting on that. But any questions on any of these different resources? Can I ask you a question? Can you see how having some of these kinds of tools can be a help towards channeling and helping us to direct our energies on what God has said to do and not get siphoned off? We don't think of them that way when we see them advertised. We think, oh, that's just another gimmick, another tool, another trick. But if we have a mindset saying, no, but our job is to make sure that we're staying on track with what God said to do, then these things become really important helps to make sure that we're aligning our energies and our resources on the things that the Master wants them used for. Amen?